And here we are for another episode of CUZZO-OP. My name is Isaiah, and I will be the host for this evening, hosting a conversation with my brother and my cousin,
Willie, aka Arrow.
Willie, aka Arrow. We're here for another conversation, and if you've read our description, then you know this is an important episode. It's especially important to me, hence me hosting. We're going to be doing a dive into the filmography of Christopher Nolan, legendary director, one of the most well-known directors in Hollywood, I would argue. You know the name. Even if you don't know his movies, you're like, why do I know that name? It's because this guy has changed the game in more ways than we can probably even touch on tonight. Nonetheless, we're going to try. I want to hear, before we jump into the structure of this episode that I've got set up, Willie, you went through the entire lineup in preparation for this episode. What do you think about him?
Look, to say the least about Nolan, number one, for the listeners, this is definitely IV's episode. He came to me with this idea. He said, yo, we got to talk Nolan before Oppenheimer. And I recognize that it's his favorite director. So I said, you know what? Sure, because Nolan is great. That's my feelings about Nolan. He's great. And in my opinion, you're going to hear me say this a few times in this episode. Nolan is at his best when he trusts his audience and when he is doing his wonky crap. But when he trusts us to understand or comprehend what's going on the screen is when he's at his best. And I really do wish I could say more, but I mean, we'll get into that.
You technically do have more, and that's something that I think is good to mention too. We are going to go through the entire lineup, but part of why we felt like this episode would be special to jump into is because Oppenheimer, it drops tomorrow. In fact, it dropped tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern. So it's like, I'm excited to do this because it's in preparation. I've got my tickets. I'm doing a double feature. I'm not doing a Barbie Oppenheimer. I know that's wild. But CUZZO-OP wise, we will be doing a little Oppenheimer Barbie double feature in case you didn't hear us on our last episode. So I'm excited. I love Nolan for one reason and one reason only. And it's this. Nolan understands pacing. He understands time. And I think time is his main character in every single movie. He personifies time. But we're going to jump in. Let's start off right at the tippy top of his lineup, okay? This is Nolan fresh into the game without even a legitimate full picture film. In 1998, we had him drop Following. Now, listen, I actually have not seen this, even though I am a huge Nolan fan, and I'll take the shots for it. But it's just one of those ones that I haven't sat down and watched yet. But I've heard from tons of friends that you can see where he was already headed trajectory-wise. I know you watched it, so tell me, what did you think about it, and do you think it's worth the 60 minutes, even if you say I shouldn't? I'm still going to watch it, so it doesn't matter.
Look, when it comes to Following, number one, it's important to mention that he made this with $6,000, and so the production value isn't, a huge Hollywood blockbuster film. It's Nolan trying to get out his first piece. And in my opinion, he did it. He did a great job. You can definitely see the early seeds of Chris Nolan's just work here. You can see all his techniques being tinkered with that he would later master. He's tinkering with them there. He's doing his draft. And I think that it's worth the 60, 70 minutes, in my opinion. I thought it was a very fun time and interesting to see his first visionary piece.
I mean, even if you look at the people he worked with actor-wise, a lot of these people do not return. And the thing about Nolan that's so interesting is I feel like from Memento forward, maybe Memento is also on this, and Nolan likes to work with the same people. I think it has to do with what you said earlier about being able to trust the audience. That trust is also necessary from his cast. so that he can take us places that he wants to take us. So I'm gonna watch this, but yeah, that's the general consensus. I've heard it's kind of like a outlier in the solar system of Nolan.
Well, two things to that point. Number one, John Nolan, Chris Nolan's uncle, is in this movie, and he returns sometimes. You know, I saw him in Dunkirk, right? But then on the other hand, the name Cobb is in this movie, which, you know, is a fun Easter egg, but obviously not an Easter egg to like Inception, even though it would work the other way around, because we know that Leo's character's name is also Cobb in that movie. So I wonder what the connection there is, but guess what? Well, I've never looked into it. Maybe I'll find out one day.
Ooh, you said Cobb, and I kind of got excited because we talking Inception and stuff. But we got time. We got time. But yeah, there's definitely Easter eggs in the lore of Christopher Nolan's films, which I think makes it's another note too, and I think we'll have a ton of these as we keep talking, how great of a director he is. You know, it's not a buckshot of a bunch of different types of movies, though they are very different from one another in a lot of different ways. There's this when a producer makes a song and produces it for another artist, you can tell if a producer is really good because they have a signature sound and there's a signature style that Nolan has. And so stuff like Cobb in there, it's all a part of the lore of who Christopher Nolan is as a director, which I really love. So speaking of, let's just jump in right into the next one, right? This is the first one that I had to go back and watch after seeing Inception, okay? So we go back to 2000, Memento. Memento was an insane film. And honestly, if you look at all of the writing in terms of how it was responded to in the theaters, all of the stats, it wasn't like this super duper tremendously successful film because it was very different film. And I think that this is where what you were talking about, again, about like Nolan daring to take us places and ask us to trust him as he takes us there. Memento was that movie, for those who don't remember, where the guy got tattoos to remember because he had short-term memory loss and could not remember what was going on in moments, in days, and he's trying to solve the murder of his wife. So I want to hear your thoughts, bro. Did you watch this for the first time like last week?
I did watch this movie for the first time about 2 weeks ago, and right from the beginning, it's trippy.
Oh, yeah, absolute, bro.
It's a trippy film with the black and white scenes and the color scenes, and I'm gonna let you talk on that. But for me, it was just a doozy of a ride, and you know, I think if this is the film that really put Nolan on the map, I understand it because there's so many layers and aspects of this that he had to plan, and it's so intricate and it works so well that I think he did his thing.
What I liked about this movie was that it shows how rudimentary Nolan was in 2000. And now that we're in 2023, he's gotten so much more nuanced about the themes that he wants to get across. Even Following, right? Following has this line between like who's good and who's evil, what's right and what's wrong. But it's kind of like it's kind of jarring the way he jumps between it. And I think in this movie, it's very jarring. In fact, he leans into it. He'll give us black and white shots of memories that he's trying to recall from the past. Then we'll get color shots that's present. So we're like, what's real? What's not? This is an unreliable narrator. And, bro, I think this is one of the more unique ones from Nolan in light of that, man, because of how different it is and how jarring it is. Bro, I watched this movie on my iPod Touch. Actually, it was like I'm back in the day when iPod Touches were still going. Like I watched this thing, and I remember like it didn't hit for me. It didn't hit because I think I needed to watch more Nolan films to have a deeper appreciation for what this film was. And then I came back and I watched it with a couple of friends, and I realized the brilliance in the way that he delivers this. Have you seen the video of him with the chalkboard?
If it's the video with him in the studio with the chalkboard talking about the black and white is what's going forward, and then the color is what's in reverse, and yada, 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 I've seen it. It's great. It's great stuff. He did his thing.
Yo, they say that video holds a lot of where he got Tenet's ideas from. And that's what I'm trying to tell you, bro. How could you be so tapped in, like conceptually, that like you created your movie in 2000 and then at the same time birthed an idea that wouldn't manifest till 2020?
He inceptioned himself.
How did he do it to himself, bro? He conducted inception on himself, bro.
I mean, look, here's what I'll say about Memento, okay? It's my least favorite Nolan film. I had a couple of Nolan films under my belt before watching this, so I respect the genius and I understand it all. But it's just my least favorite film, even though Guy Pearce kills his role.
Yeah, I mean, Guy Pearce just killed his role in this one, and I think you could tell you see any of the behind the scenes stuff that Nolan worked very closely with him on this one. Another thing about this, though, also is this is an adaptation from a book. Did you know that? Memento Mori?
I did know that. It's written by his brother, Jonathan, I believe. No, not the uncle Jonathan, his brother.
And that's the other thing about Nolan. I feel like there are ideas, obviously, that he creates from scratch, but it's like he's a triple threat because he can do an adaptation and create his own version of something that's already established. He can jump into a world like the Dark Knight trilogy and take a concept or a character and then build out something. And he can do his own thing. So it's like, how many directors do you know that can do that so seamlessly to the point where you're like, is this his? Oh, it's an adaptation. Another reason why I love Nolan. It's just he's a great writer. Pacing on this movie, I mean, just so the people know, Rotten Tomatoes has this thing rated at 93%. And it's very, very rare that a movie from Nolan is not certified fresh in the eyes of the viewers for whatever reason, right? And I think that what he showed here was that he's able to take a hard to understand or grasp concept and still get it across the camera in a way that you can pick up and you can appreciate. And he builds off of this. He builds off this momentum. Then let's jump into the next film. And this is, a lot of people don't even know this film exists. This is 2002's Insomnia.
See, now it's funny that you brought up the fact that he's a triple threat because this film is a remake and he delivered. So he was able to deliver on the remake aspect also, since the Norwegian 1997 film was this. He just delivered it differently, and I think he landed there too.
I agree. This is one of my, if I had to say what you said about Memento, I would take Memento over this movie. I think this is one of the weaker ones from him, which is why I hadn't actually seen this until like 2020. Someone told me, hey, did you know that he did an actual feature film starring Pacino? And I was like, Pacino? No way. And then they were like, yeah. And Robin Williams, RIP, is in there. Bro, when I heard Robin Williams and Pacino and Nolan, I said, yo, babe, I know what we watching tonight. I told my wife, I said, yo, we watching this one tonight. Different, bro.
Not only is Robin Williams in this movie, he is the antagonist of this movie, which we don't usually get to see from him. And I think he killed this role.
Bro, he actually murdered this role. And I think I felt so creeped out by him. I think the reason why the movie is so good is it reminds me of Vertigo from Hitchcock. Because it has to do with Pacino being in Alaska, called in to solve a case. All these murders are going on. He's coming from LA to Alaska to come solve this mystery. And the concept of sun and how the light in Alaska never goes away. People have to put blackout curtains on their windows in order to get themselves some sleep so that their bodies can respond. He played into this concept so much. And I just really liked Pacino landing the writing, but Nolan took his signature, let me tell a deeper story than what you see on the surface. Let me leave you with something you're going to walk out of the theater holding on to. That's what I felt like I left with. But this is where the Insomnia is a little different. It was almost like I'm glad this one ended. Like, I'm glad this is over. I'm glad this one is donezo. That's how I walked out of this movie. That's how I felt when it was done. Every other Nolan movie, I'm like, damn, I wish I had some more of that. But this was one of those ones where I was just like, whew, thank God that's done.
I mean, perhaps the fact that it's a remake plays a part into that, right? Because it's his most straightforward film. There is no crazy necessary twist or anything huge like that. It's a remake, and so perhaps that factor played a role in it. So is it a Nolan movie, or is it just a movie that Nolan directed?
I think that that's what it is. It's not as much of a Nolan movie, but what is Nolan about it is the psychological concept, because he likes talking about the psychology of his characters. He likes to take the archetype of a character and blow it up to the nth degree so that we can really wrestle with why this character does this and why this character does that. And we're seeing the threading between these first three movies for sure.
I mean, when it comes to Insomnia, for me, it's Pacino at the end when he says to the cop, don't sacrifice yourself or don't lose yourself, because he had done that, right? So I like the way it fully came around. But there are three categories for Nolan for me, and it may be like one outlier. Category one, his realistic, grounded movies. We have Memento, even though it's a little crazy, it's still just a story of revenge. And then we have this movie, it's just a detective movie, The Following, right? Then we have his Batman movies. I just put those three in a category of their own. And then we have his Nolan big capital letter movies. And so I noticed that his more grounded, maybe not Nolan movies are towards the bottom of my list.
Heck yeah, man. Yeah, and before we launch off to 2005, another thing that I want to mention is that like Nolan's really good at bad guys. He's really good at antagonists, in my opinion, and making believable antagonists that you actually want to kind of side with sometimes. Because again, without it being too on the nose from this point forward in his filmography, the way that he films the motivations of these antagonists, it almost gives you an empathetic opportunity to put your feet in their shoes and then be like, hold up, would I see the world similarly in light of what I've gone through, in the light of, so the cat and mouse game that Robin Williams is playing with Pacino the whole time, I'm kind of wanting to egg. I'm like, yeah, this is it.
That's kind of why I go into liking Following a little bit more. I like that antagonist more than the, super deep antagonist of like Memento with, is it him? Is he his own type vibe? And Robin Williams was a great antagonist also. And I'm looking forward to getting into some more antagonists as we move forward.
Okay, so we jump into 2005. This is 3 years after Insomnia. And honestly, this is the movie that I would say landed in terms of the popularity that Nolan now has. I think this was the one that got him a lot of the popularity. And it's because he tackled the one and only Batman in Batman Begins. In 2005, this began his Dark Knight trilogy. And I think this movie is high-key slept on. I think that Batman Begins, like we've spoken about, if you're new here at CUZZO-OP, go back, listen to anything that has to do with Batman. We have a conversation about the Dark Knight versus the latest Batman from 2022, where I mentioned the fact that the Gotham that Nolan was able to create in this particular movie was awesome. And I think that he's still using the same muscles that he was using to create a psychological display of a character in the way that he creates a living and breathing character out of Gotham City in this particular movie. You feel the grit, you feel the darkness, you feel the weight, and then it makes the decision that Batman has and makes to save his city, to be a light in his city, even more meaningful. And that's why I'm glad Nolan is the one that tackled this trilogy. But again, man, I'm talking pacing, crazy. I'm talking writing, crazy. I'm talking Ra's al Ghul. You kind of rooting for yo, you kind of rooting for my man Liam Neeson. Let's be realistic, bro. Ross pops up and you like, hey, listen, Gotham is kind of a shithole. Let's be real. Let's be real. I mean, you going about it kind of sideways, but at the same time, I kind of understand. And then this is also very important. I know you got some points, but this is when we see Cillian Murphy make his first debut in a Nolan film, and we see him pop up 5 more times from this point.
I mean, look, I loved Cillian Murphy in this. He was very young, funny enough. When I watched the other day, I was like, damn, yo, he's actually pretty young here. 20 years ago, sure. Liam Neeson, I had some reserves about him being Ra's al Ghul just because I don't picture Ra's al Ghul to be a straight up white man, but he did his thing still. Liam Neeson, he'll always be there, my guy. Christian Bale, he delivers. And I know that I've said it before that I don't like his take on Batman, and it's not because of him. Well, it is with his Batman voice. It's terrible. That joint is garbage. But it's also just in relation to the way the character is written as like a Batman fan, but Bale delivers also. But I just can't deal with the voice.
I think it was like this play between, because I remember having all these discussions about a realistic take, with my air quotes up, on Batman, and that Nolan's trying to bring a semblance of realism to the concept of Batman. And I agree with you in terms of the first 3 films we've spoken about tonight being more practical, but that notion's still there, bro. There's still this level of like he tried to ground this trilogy in humanity. And I think he did it well. So if I have to deal with a Bale talking like this every 10 seconds to let you know I'm here for Gotham, then maybe it's a Nolan film. I'm with it.
And I recognize that you might be more forgiving of all of this because you are a Nolan fan. So sure, you know what? I'll give it to you, bro. Whatever. I just think that Nolan could have had him do something else. I do fault the movie for making those scenes tougher to watch, but it's easy to forgive also in some aspects. Now, the real stars of a lot of this trilogy are the villains, and I feel like in this particular movie, you can flip tails about whether or not you find them more interesting than the main character, but the human psyche and all of that is dived into very well.
I just think it takes a special mind to direct a film that can dive deeply into the human psyche the way that Nolan does it. There's a very small handful of directors that do it well, where it doesn't feel like you're force feeding me a lesson or making me have to think differently. It's always felt like an invitation. Back to that point, I think you put it really well. He trusts us. He trusts us as viewers to come on this journey with him. And speaking of the journey, I think that's the magic of Nolan's approach, right? Magic, right? So let's jump into a magic movie, huh? 2006, The Prestige. Now, let me tell you a story, Willie.
You've told me a story related to this movie before, so I wonder if this is going to be it.
Potentially. All I'm going to say is this. It's 2010. Inception comes out, and I'm super pumped, and I can't get enough. I've watched this movie like 4 times, right? And then my boys, Steven, and a friend we had in high school named Jason, shout out to Jason, they were like, yo, but have you seen The Prestige, though? And I was like, nah. They were like, yeah, like, do you want to see Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale go head-to-head in a magician rivalry? And I said, heck yeah, I do. And they were like, The Prestige. And then I started looking the movie up, bro. I said, Scarlett Johansson's in here too? As a love interest? Oh, nah, I gotta watch this, bro. So then I found it. I think this was another iPod Touch underneath the bed sheets watch, bro. Like late at night, I should be asleep because I got school in the morning, but I'm running this, bro. Yo, when I tell you this movie, bro, there are movies that you watch that just stick with you for days. And again, man, I'm going to keep talking about this over and over again. Nolan knows how to end a film so that it resonates for a very long time in your mind, where you're either asking yourself a question like, does this mean this? Does this mean that? How do I get the audience as a director to leave the theater and talk about my movie, not just on the drive home? Because a lot of times you'll watch a movie and you'll just forget it. You'll get home and it's just like, it was nice. Nolan won't rest almost until he's committed inception that is long lasting in your brain, and Prestige is one of those moments. The Prestige is one of those moments. Bro, I watched this film, and when I tell you the final ending moment with the ball, bro, it shook me to my core. There's not a bad thing I have to say about this film, Willie. I'm gonna be real with you, bro. Down to this point, Hugh Jackman was the perfect casting for his character, the prideful motherfucker who won't rest until he can figure out how to best this magician, and he'll cheat and he'll go into the end of supernatural electric Tesla means. He'll do what he has to do to beat this guy for all of what pride's worth. The biggest thing on display here. But then Christian Bale, after watching Batman Begins, you see him in this flick, and you're like, yo, I need more of this in my Batman, dog. I need more of this grit. I need more of this punch. I need more of this. You're twins? This shit is crazy, bro. It's fucking crazy. I love the shiz out of this movie, bro. I love the shiz. The twist is so fire. The fact that Bale's character was only able to do half of what he was doing because he had a brother. The fact that at the end he just shows how they were brothers. The fact that his brother has to mourn the fact that his brother was killed. He did everything so well. I think the pacing was so good that I didn't have any time to let up, bro. There was no let up point. It's just like point after point after point after point, and he's just. It's a trick after a trick, bro. It's a trick after a trick.
Look, just because this is your Nolan episode, I'm going to keep things quick. Christian Bale killed it. He always does. Hugh Jackman, my favorite acting in the movie. He's a beast. In my opinion, this is Scarlett Johansson's best role that I've ever seen her in.
Yo, bro, she's gripping in this.
She is definitely gripping in this, but to keep my speed run alive, the twist. I know I had a different experience than 15-year-old Isaiah under the covers, right? Because when I'm looking at Christian Bale's Alfred and everybody else is looking at Christian Bale's Alfred, we're seeing that, and yeah, oh, look, it's Fallon too, and everybody's like, oh, look at Fallon, haha. I'm seeing two Christian Bales on my screen. I heard it in his voice as soon as he spoke for the first time as Fallon in the same room as Alfred. I knew that it was Bale. I knew by his side profile that it was Bale in a beard. It's so easy to tell when you understand and have seen Christian Bale in so many different projects, and you know all the different ways that he could just look. So by the end of the movie, when he's like, surprise, I'm a twin, I'm like, I knew that already, but okay. For me, the big major twist was that Tesla, played by David Bowie, which was freaking wild, created cloning, basically. Like, that was my twist. I was like, oh shit, right? But I want to dive into all the ways that they teased the big twist that everybody else has to us. Number one, we have the speech at the beginning of the movie with Christian Bale speaking about, we were just two young men never trying to hurt anyone. And you're meant to think he's talking about him and Hugh Jackman's, like, feud. Nah, he's talking about him and his brother, the twin brother, the two young men who didn't mean to hurt Jackman. Crazy. Up next, we have the fact that when Hugh Jackman's wife dies and nobody can tell him, what knot did I tie? What knot did you tie? Well, how did you kill my wife? They don't know because the twins tie different knots. So when they're doing it, they can't exactly say it or else they're going to be screwed over, right? Completely like just shafted. The little boy at the beginning when he's like, where's the bird's brother? That right there, that's a line that's meant to signify like it's a brother, the disappearing act. They're twins, just like the birds, just like Alfred's big main use. Shit is crazy. The love triangle or four-person aspect, that with the wife of Alfred saying, you love me today, but not every day. Because depending on the brother, he doesn't love her. And when the little daughter is announced to be, in the belly of the wife, she's like, I'm pregnant. And he's like, we need to tell Fallon because Fallon is the real father. Those are just a lot of the different things that I recognized that shit was dope. That shit was dope. That all the twists and everything, I can appreciate this movie. In fact, I would argue that this is the movie that someone should see if they want to understand the early workings of Chris Nolan, because this can get them hooked more than something like The Following, in my opinion. This is like definitive Nolan when he's not doing his crazy Nolan business. This is the practical Nolan.
I think that that's what's great about Nolan, right? It's like this book was written. This is an adaptation of a book that has the same name, but it's like he gets inspired. He gets inspired by content, and then he comes up with this way to visually get that message across. And honestly, bro, it's like the same reasons why I think Glass Onion is a great movie. The same reasons why I like Rian Johnson as a director. It's like the subtext. He's very good at subtext, at world building, at I'm saying a lot of things to you, but if you don't have ears to hear or eyes to see it, you'll think I'm not saying much at all. And yet there's a lot of movie in me not saying much. But when you're ready to tap in and see and hear more, there's even more movie behind that. And I think the depth of his writing, the depth of his pacing, the depth of his shots, certain lines, the way they're edited. We know he's really big on audio, on dialogue, on the way lines hit and the time in which they hit. I think he's super meticulous about those details, and it all is for a good reason. This movie was a great opportunity to see that all come together. Loved it, man. So good. That's my number 2 movie from Nolan.
Absolutely. And, to quickly dive into that antagonist talk that we were talking about earlier, both of these dudes suck, Most of the people in this movie, in fact. I'd say that the only innocent people is the wife, Sarah, I believe her name was. Everybody else, Hugh's characters, Bale's characters, even Michael Caine's character, they all kind of just suck. So, sure, the antagonist could be Bale's character maybe, but in terms of being a bad person and a bad guy, they were all the bad guys. Hugh Jackman was trying to not be earlier in the movie, but this descent and this feud into just back and forth turned him into a bad guy. As he says in the movie, he had to get his hands dirty, and he did. So that's why I also thought it was interesting to just see what these two would do. And it was always fun seeing how they completely just fucked over each other. But I'm ready to move on. We've spoken about this next movie before. We have an episode kind of on it. It's iconic to this day. It's still spoken about. So what movie am I talking about?
The Dark Knight. I don't really need to say much. Heath Ledger, Joker, number 2 from the trilogy. Probably one of the most popular, if not the most popular, superhero DC Batman films.
Definitely iconic.
And so let's dive into it. Bro. I think that if you really want a true breakdown of this movie, again, you should go back and listen to our Dark Knight versus the Batman from 2022 episode. We really jump into this movie fully. So we don't have to spend too much time here. But as a Nolan film, Willie, talk to me, bro. Talk to me.
Look, as a Nolan movie, it's a 9 out of 10. It's great. I'm just going to read my Letterboxd review. The Dark Knight is an absolute masterpiece of a film. Chris Nolan has crafted something special, and it's no surprise that this is considered one of the greatest superhero films of all time. Bale is great in his role as Batman, but I'm not a fan of how his Bruce Wayne is written, and I find Batman to be the least interesting character in the movie. Like I said, Bale delivers, but didn't find the character incredibly interesting. The real standout here is Ledger's iconic performance as the Joker. We know this. One hell of a performance. It remembered, iconic, forever. Heart and soul of the movie, actually. On the other hand, we have Aaron Eckhart, who also does a really great job as Harvey Dent. He was brilliant. They carry this movie on their back along with Gary Oldman. But the film is intense from start to finish. It has great build-up, suspense. It's a must-see, absolutely. But the ending is what really shines. It's one of the most iconic endings of all time. And, even if I don't necessarily agree with all of the decisions made with it, I still have to give it the respect and praise that it does deserve as an ending.
Yeah, I think that that's also important. You're right, because as far as superhero stories go, we needed the Joker ending, and perhaps that is the most disillusioning point in the movie. But I think it's disillusioning not because it's a Batman movie, but because it's a Nolan movie. Nolan doesn't like ending on these concepts of like, everything's okay. We win. Like you said back in Insomnia, Pacino's lost. His statement only lands because we've watched him fall apart all movie. So even these moments that are supposed to feel like great endings, Nolan doesn't let them be storybook endings, because if he does that, then I think it kind of puts him in a box, and he breaks out of a box as a director, especially in this movie with that ending. It gave me something to talk about, man. Was Batman right? The Dark Knight. That's what it means to be a Dark Knight. So good, dude. Great film.
Yeah, to your point about storybook endings, I think that he's definitely a director who prefers to not have those, which is what we're probably going to speak about when we get to like The Dark Knight Rises. But something I want to talk about is the score of this film, especially like my favorite being the Joker's that plays whenever he's doing some scheming and everything. It just builds up that great suspense. Nolan is very good most of the time with his sound work.
And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the use of sound by Nolan, because he works closely with Zimmer. He works closely with whoever is the composer to create these moments, because they also are very important in him getting the picture across of his characters, right? As we get to Dunkirk, that note that he found, I think that this is kind of when he started touching on that, because the reality is this Joker note that plays, it doesn't resolve. It's angst. It's angst in a sound. So it's like, man, you're painting angst through the writing, you're painting angst through the pacing, and now you're painting angst through the sound. It's just so intentional, bro. Freaking love that movie. So good, Dark Knight. Now, let's launch off, man. 2010. I would argue this is his most popular movie. Talk to me. I think this is his most popular movie. And the reason why may not even be because of him himself. I think it's because of who was in it. I think Leo's star power is something that we're talking Inception, man. We're talking Inception. Listeners, stop for a second. It's 2010. This movie just came out. Imagine where you were when you watched this film. This movie took movies in the whole movie world by storm. It took it by storm. And I think it introduced on a grand level, I think because of, again, who was involved in the film, I think it started something. It opened doors for certain things. I went back and watched this movie again, and I was reminded of the first time that I watched it. And I remember, like, this was one of those movies that I just didn't want to end, man. I didn't want to wake up from this dream. We're going to talk about this in depth because I got to take the time. This is me on record talking about my favorite movie, okay? Here's what I got to say, bro. Let's talk about the concept of dreams. Let's talk about the fact that this man sat in a boardroom with his brother somewhere, wherever the frick they were, and they said, what we'll do is we'll half time every time they dive deeper into a dream. Bro, who even thinks of that to begin with, dog? Like, the way that he's able to edit characters going through different actions at different levels of dreams at the same time. I don't think people got that. Like, if you really just pause for a second, you're watching a bus fly through the air about to hit water for like 45 minutes, dog. For like 45 minutes while the remainder of the movie is going on at the depth and the people in that bus are asleep. It's just crazy. Here's what I loved about Inception. This is when I really fell for it. This is one of those movies where you are on the edge of your seat from the beginning of the movie to the end. They do a little build up in the first 30 minutes. They introduce the concept to you, which is something Nolan's famous for. Let me take you somewhere. Trust me with this concept. Okay, you got it? Okay, here we go. Let's embark on the journey. Now we're embarking. But here's what I love about Nolan, bro. We don't learn it in a way that I feel like is not, tasteful. When Cobb is sitting there explaining to Ariadne how to manipulate the architecture of dreams and to build out these worlds, you're in there, bro. And I know some people who pieced out. They were like, it's too much. Yo, shame on you, bro. Shame on you for real, respectfully. I'm biased. I don't care. But bro, this is movie magic at its finest. This is where my man launched off and he said, I'm going to get supernatural. I'm going to start messing with concepts that don't make any sense, but also make mad sense for some reason. And Leonardo DiCaprio carries this movie to places only Leonardo DiCaprio can take this movie. And he wouldn't have been able to do it without Joseph Gordon-Levitt coming beside him as his best bud, his boy riding with him, Arthur, floating through the hotel, blowing shiz up. How do I do it if I don't have gravity? Oh, I ran up these stairs, but then I changed the stairs to this so I could be... Yo, bro, the movie is filled with so much character development, with so much grief, with great pacing, with a lot of suspense, with a lot of drama. I also can't move past the fact that Tom Hardy is one of my favorite characters from this movie, bro.
Yep, Tom Hardy is one of those actors that comes when Nolan calls him.
A Nolan staple. And that's why I was so glad to see him return in Rises, which we'll talk about soon. But man, bro, this is just Isaiah geeking out about his favorite film. I love, there's a line, man. There's a line in the beginning when Saito is offering Cobb an opportunity to do Inception on Cillian Murphy's character. And he's about to leave. And he looks at him and he gives him an opportunity and he says, you can leave or you could take this. But the question is, do you want to grow old and become a man filled with regret, waiting to die alone? And that line, I just think conceptually is so big, but then when visually Nolan gets that line across on the screen, I just think he wasn't playing around with this one, bro. He wasn't playing around this one. This is his from the ground up. Him and his brother wrote the crap out of this film, man.
We're going to call it the CUZZO-OP trade. When you dive in and you geek out, I'm a speedrunner, Inception, 9.5 out of 10 movie, in my opinion. Even with the plot holes, they are forgivable. This is Nolan category stuff. This is when he's just bugging out, and I'm here for it all. I think that he trusts us in this movie. The way that I was speaking about earlier, he trusts us to just be along for the ride. It's a suspending thriller. It's mad fun. It's mad engaging right from the start, in my opinion, Leo is fantastic in this movie. Tom Hardy, Ken Watanabe, Elliot Page, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, they are all crazy good in this movie. Hans Zimmer, as usual, he's going to kill it. He's going to do his thing. Shout outs to Hans Zimmer, It's very immersive when you hear the theme. And that's the point of the movie, right? To be immersed in these dreams. Cillian Murphy did a great job also. I got to talk about him, Oppenheimer. It's complex. And I think that he masterfully wove together this just complex thing that it just works for me. The way that he built the studio to have the hallway flip and turn for Joseph Gordon-Levitt, crazy. Shout outs to Nolan. He is constantly just doing innovative things that people nowadays don't want to do. They've gotten lazy. They want to use CGI. And I think that CGI can definitely be used to enhance a movie. But Nolan building that hallway and letting Levitt do what he had to do in that hallway and physically, impressive. Shout outs to them both. It's just a mind-bending thriller. And I think everyone should watch this, really. I mean, the ending, right? It arguably his most iconic, next to The Prestige, perhaps. So that's why I feel, man.
Very unclear, and to this day, we still don't know. I saw an interview last week that Leonardo still doesn't know. He just know, we just know Cobb's happy, right? But
You know, since you're bringing up Cobb once more, one thing that I really wonder is how come Leo hasn't worked with Chris Nolan since then? It's shocking considering Nolan loves to keep the same people around.
You know, man, I think Leo is one of those actors, bro, where it's just kind of like if you hit such a peak moment with him, it's hard unless you're Scorsese, bro, like, and you could just pull out crazy blockbuster, crazy concepts that Leo can try to like rise to the occasion of. Again, man, I'm not saying Christopher Nolan is the best director of all time, bro. I'm just saying that he is a cornerstone presence in movies, bro. For sure. And this was when I think this movie was when he told everybody, hey, listen, stop playing with me.
Definitely a crazy movie to put in between your middle movie and a conclusion movie of a trilogy you're doing. So I say let's get into the next movie, bro.
Dark Knight Rises 2012. We're going to the final installment of the Dark Knight trilogy here. And we mentioned it a little bit because we talked about Tom Hardy, right? We see Tom Hardy jump in here as Bane, and he is actually one of the first things we see.
Definitely a crazy opening to a film with Tom Hardy there.
Again, man, I think the same reason why Tom Hardy is successful as Bane is the same reason why Heath Ledger had the room to be insane as Joker. It's because Nolan is so good about this. And before we move on from Inception completely, what we're noticing here is like, again, man, who's a bad guy? Who's a good guy? In Inception, we don't really know who the antagonist really and we enter into Rises, and a lot of people don't like this movie because it feels like a tonal big gear shift, man, a big gear shift from where Dark Knight left off. I think that it was hard, man. It was hard to come off of Dark Knight and then Inception after Dark Knight to do Dark Knight Rises. It's almost like it fell short, ironically.
Well, he had arguably two of the biggest movies that he's ever made, right? And then The Dark Knight Rises, a conclusion. You know, we spoke about his storybook endings and how he doesn't like to do those, which he kind of had to try and do here. And in terms of the entire movie, I feel like this is Nolan, his least put together Batman movie. I think this might be the sloppiest Batman movie that he has from an editing standpoint, from some of the acting standpoint even. I just think that this movie is sloppy in many ways, very disorganized, relying on coincidences and stuff, and yet it's not my least favorite one, but it's definitely the sloppiest one. But that ending is something that is like, how do we feel about the ending?
I can imagine that Nolan probably sucks at endings of trilogies. That's my theory, right? Like, I think stories that he's had time to build up, I can imagine he has a hard time ending it. It's different when you start the story and end it in one go. You know, it's just different. And I think like that's almost like this is one of his shortcomings for sure as a director. Not that the movie's not excellent, but I don't know. It felt a little phoned in. There were certain things that we felt were phoned in, right? I think even down to the Gotham aspect, bro. Like, it's shamelessly, shout outs to Thomas. It's shamelessly Chicago. Like, we're not in Gotham and New York. So it's like there are certain decisions there, but I also, you know, who knows what played a role in that. Speaking of ending, though, like, I think that this is another where he left a signature for himself. We talked about the ending in this movie for some time, because he introduces this concept of Michael Caine's character as Alfred seeing Christian Bale with Catwoman, Bruce with Catwoman. And it's like, is it real? Is it not? And we're asking because we just saw Inception and we were like, is it real? Is it not? And I think he played on that pretty well. And I did like that was the dialogue leaving the theater. And honestly, still to this day, we don't know, right? But you're right, bro. I think in terms of one of the weaker films, he did enter into a weaker space here. And some would say that he peaked at Inception as a director, and then Interstellar after this, which we'll jump into now, was also not that great. There are some people who don't like this movie that much, man.
You know, I've seen two camps for Interstellar. It's either you think it's the top two for Nolan or you think it's the bottom of the barrel. I feel like I have not seen any in between. For me, I think it's in my top five. You know, it might almost did make a top two, But then after thinking about it, nah, top 5.
Yeah, that's hard. I think I would probably agree with you on most days. Sometimes though, Dark Knight is above it.
Earlier, I made the statement that Nolan trusts us sometimes and doesn't others. And this is the movie that made me create that statement. This is the film where Nolan did not trust his audience. I feel it. He tries to explain everything to us. Now, I understand trying to explain, like, the way that your spaceship works, but when you have lines speaking about the way love works, because we don't understand as audiences what love is, that is where you lose me.
Yeah, man. I think like all of his skeleton, right? Like pacing and music and score and some of the writing and some of the moments of the exposition of the characters. All great. Nolan. That's Nolan. I see you, Nolan. I see you, Nolan.
I definitely see him in the visual department because this movie is visually stunning.
There's just so many cool things to talk about with this movie, but what's true with what you're saying is he did too much exposition, and then he had this kind of like soap opera-y vibe of like a theme of love that he tried to kind of like throw in there, and I don't know if it went together. A lot of the times when Nolan does a theme, it feels like it goes together like peanut butter and jelly. You know what I mean? Like the pacing with the writing and all. This movie kind of felt like a
too much peanut butter almost.
It had a little too much peanut butter in there, bro. It wasn't enough of a ratio, but it's still like I watched it a couple of days ago, and I'm still watching this thing front to back, dog. There are a couple moments that I just can't move on without mentioning, like the surprise jump out from Matt Damon. None of the promotional material. I was working at the movie theater at this time, just starting to, and nothing promotional material had Matt Damon's name on it, bro. When this is like a cameo and a half. Like, it's not even really a cameo.
Yeah, it's definitely a role.
Yeah, it's a role, but it's like the way that it was dropped in. It was like, this is kind of like the world John Bernthal lives in, like where you just see like a random John Bernthal cameo. And it's like, whoa, what? This is what Matt Damon did here. And I love that they surprised us with that. But at the same time, it also kind of felt called in. It also kind of felt phoned in because everything didn't always like jar and mesh well. But it is what it is, man. I did really like Murphy's character. I love the concept of Murphy's character. I love the iconic scene. First off, Matthew McConaughey, bro, carries the film.
Absolutely. And if I'm gonna cut in right now, you know, he does his thing in this movie. I was tuned in to every scene that Matthew McConaughey was just working on, bro. He needed to pay some bills with this one because I loved him in this movie. I also loved a lot of the other cast, you know. I actually liked Anne Hathaway in this. I'm back and forth with her usually. Jessica Chastain as Murph as she got older. She was great. Michael Caine, you know, he's always around. Casey Affleck, you know, he was around for quite a bit. Damon did great. My boy Venom from Spider-Man 3 was in this. Even Timothée Chalamet, which I don't think I've ever seen one of his movies, but I think that the cast did well, even with the things that they were given to do, like Anne Hathaway with a lot of her exposition.
And to that point, then she's also the big linchpin moment for like the love story in terms of like why she's chasing. And then it's like, oh, you've been making all these brainiac claims about why we should do this and why we should do that, all to find out that what motivates you is something very human. And I understand what Nolan was trying to do, but I just, again, like I agree with you, a little jarring.
Yeah, you know, score was another thing in this movie that really did its thing. Like it was a great listen. It added depth to a lot of the scenes. I think the score plus what was going on in some of the scenes made me tear up a few times because this movie has some good gut punches. But I believe it's something like the cornfield chase or something like that. That soundtrack is great. It's great for this.
I also think we can't move on without talking about time here again. Time is a main character in this film. Time is this ominous, you know. F. Scott Fitzgerald has this line in Great Gatsby where he talks about the shrill of the fifth guest in this one opening scene of the book. And it gives like the absence of a person through this phone call, a personified nature. And if you've seen that movie and if you read that book, you know what I'm talking about. I think that time has this shrill as a guest introduced into every single scene. Every character is very much aware of what the resource and the commodity of time is in this movie. And then the pacing, again, man, pacing wise, the last scene where he's seeing things stitched together, and then Murph's doing the math, and then realizing that the ghost was the dad. It's just he writes this. To sit in a room and write that takes a lot of skill. Let's be realistic. But that's not his last time doing a dance with time. He goes back in time and he takes us to a very real story, a very real moment. 2017's Dunkirk. So for those who don't remember, this is about the evacuation of Allied soldiers from the beaches of Dunkirk, France, and German forces are on their way. We've got a lot of cool stars and cameos in this movie, one. And a lot of people don't see this movie or haven't seen this movie. I watched this movie. I remember who I was with. I was with Steve, and I was with Sooth, and I was with Thomas, and we saw this flick, and I remember everybody was like, that was kind of boring though, right? And I was like, yo, bro, you're wilding out right now, because how many movies have you seen where they can effortlessly almost edit together a week time-wise on land, a day at sea, and then an hour with Tom Hardy in that damn cockpit flying in that jet, bro? Crazy, dude. Crazy, bro.
This movie is in my top 5, Nolan.
Wow, that's actually crazy.
Now, something that's really funny is that I didn't even realize that Tom Hardy was in this movie until like the very end. I did not realize he was my man in the cockpit, right? But the reason why I really enjoyed Dunkirk is because it just feels so large, right? With other war films, there's a focus on individuals or a group, right? Like the main focus is on this team or this guy, and they have to push to the end of the war from day one. Meanwhile, this movie, I feel like the nation that we are witnessing trying to retreat from Dunkirk is the main character. Even though we have like our boys on the boat and Tom Hardy up in the plane, the entire army that's trying to leave is the main character, right? Time is the antagonist in this movie because we never see the Germans. We only hear them screaming, and we see and hear the bullets that are being shot at, but they never actually show us the enemy because time is the enemy. We're waiting for this week, day, hour to be over, wondering, are we going to win? Are we going to evacuate? Are we going to lose? Right? This is that whole time concept that you were talking about. We get a greater sense of scale than we do in a lot of other war movies, which is just great in my opinion. So that is the thing that I was loving about this movie. Like I said earlier, I'm falling in love with these period pieces. And so this movie on a technical level also is really impressive when you consider that Nolan, like, he does the practical stuff. So this, in my opinion, might be his peak when it comes to practicality and filmmaking. So on a technical level, I just think that this film is so advanced. I could see why some people might call it boring because people aren't going to be into everything like that. They don't get that same thrill that they get or that I get while watching things like this. So I can understand it, but I'm like really do try to convince everyone to please just try to do it again, try to watch it again, put that different lens on of from that technical level or that idea that one way I've been phrasing it is if all war movies have a first act, second act, and third act, this movie is an entire third act of a war film stretched out to be the size of a full-length movie, and I was here for it, especially with the way they were cutting back and forth and everything in the acting. I was here for it.
Here's what I have to say to end this off. As a Nolan film, I think this was just a beautiful execution of, yo, bro, I was in a theater with actual veterans from World War II. And as we were walking out of the theater, I was talking to one of them, and they couldn't even get out of their seat because they felt like they were brought back to the moments of war. And I think that just speaks, man. It just speaks to the fact that this was done with love. It was done intentionally. It was done well. It's very, very, very surreal how realistic Nolan was able to make this film. It was refreshing to have this because it almost felt like when you're at like a 5 or 6 course meal restaurant and like they give you a palate cleanser before you eat your next meal. It's almost like Nolan gave us a palate cleanser after Interstellar. And as we move on to his final movie here that's come out, I want to mention the fact that up until 2014, when Interstellar came out, Nolan was consistently delivering at a high level every 2 years. Every 2 years, there was another movie from Nolan coming out. But then in 2014, he dropped Interstellar, and then he did a 3-year break before he dropped Dunkirk in 2017, and then 3 years later, mid-pandemic, Tenet came out. Now, Willie, talk to me about Tenet, bro, because did you watch this for the first time in the last couple weeks too?
No, I saw the film back in early 2021, I believe, or late 2020. I saw it on an airplane going somewhere, but I personally believe that this is Nolan's most ambitious film.
I think it's a culminating film too. I think everything we've watched coming up, the first 10 movies before this one, if we didn't have those movies, we would have never gotten to this one. We talked about earlier how his idea for this movie was birthed at the same time that Memento was dropped. And like I said, Memento was dropped in 2000. So here we are 20 years later and we're getting Tenet. That's craziness. 20 years of practicing pacing, working with time as a character, how you put the music together, how you write in a cyclical manner, how you keep the human story at the core of all of what you're going to do dynamic wise. Let me ask you this before you go off. If you're saying that Nolan is good about asking his audience to trust him, and then we're saying with Interstellar that he didn't trust us as his viewers, I would argue that the reason why Tenet did not land well outside of pandemic is because he trusted us too much.
He definitely trusted us too much. I just think that Nolan just wanted us to feel the movie, go along with the movie. There's a line where a woman says to the protagonist, "Don't ask the questions, just let it move forward." And I'm like, all right, I'm moving forward with you. I'm going to enjoy it with you because I believe that's what you want me to do. And so it was a really fun time. I definitely think that this is one of his weaker films, but still enjoyable all the same.
I think he had to get this one out. I think that, this is Nolan's spare tire movie. I know that sounds mad wild, but it's like you'd be silly to hit the road, especially on a big trip, without a spare tire, just in case something goes wrong. And I think that we've got, again, a compilation of all of his best hits kind of coming together in a certain way, but it almost was like this was never the culmination of his films. Now, what I'm hearing about Oppenheimer is that because he did Tenet, it almost allowed for Oppenheimer to truly be the culminating moment where all of what he's done builds up to this, including how ambitious Tenet is.
You know, a lot of the acting performances were really well done, but what I think this movie shines with is, once more, the technical aspects that are delivered here, because he put a lot of work into the way that time works and going forward and backwards simultaneously and everything like that. So I think that there's a lot about this film that can be studied very well and in depth.
Oh, no, I think that this is definitely a studyable film for sure. I think any scenes with temporal pincers, like the final scene or the scene when they're fighting each other or themselves inside the airport, the hangars, gallery, the art gallery, those scenes, just masterful, man. And again, you're looking at how in Dunkirk you see a character that you saw earlier, how they got to where they were in the beginning of the film. This is where we're starting to see that executed again in Tenet, but for fun, for sport. He's doing it numerous times. It's very easy to be turned around and be like, whoa, what's going on? Where are we at? But there are moments where you catch on, even if you don't catch on fully, like the example of her talking about seeing some woman jump off the boat, and then you realize she's the woman that she thought that her husband was cheating on her with, but it was just her from a different timeline. And I'm looking at the whole movie differently when that happens, because I'm like, okay, there's something here. I just don't have all of the tools to understand it fully. And I think Nolan wanted us to be turned around, wanted us to be lost. I don't necessarily think that he intended for this movie to be one that you watch once and you receive everything that he had to give you. I don't think that's the case at all. And so, like, this isn't everyone's cup of tea. That's just what it is. This, again, I keep going back to it, but like Glass Onion isn't everyone's cup of tea. Some people just don't care for it, but that is a movie to be studied, to be watched 5, 6 times over to catch more and more Easter eggs. This movie, you have to watch it like 5 times to be able to be like, go, okay, I understand what's going on now. Every scene I have a grip on. And even then, it's kind of hard.
Look, to really just cut the Tenet talk here, if you plan on watching this movie, or if you have watched this movie, then I feel like this is the one where you got to put all your safety equipment on before going in, because this one is the ride that'll have you dragging through the mud trying to figure everything out. So just be ready for that one, man.
Listen, we could sit here and keep going off these Nolan movies for forever. But I think as it's been a decent amount of time talking Nolan, and in light of Oppenheimer right around the corner, I want to hear, man, like what are you looking forward to in light of what you've now watched, now that you're caught up on everything Nolan from Oppenheimer? What's one thing that you want, your non-negotiable from Nolan films that you want to see in Oppenheimer?
I want to see how Christopher Nolan is able to bring his style to the story of a real historical person. How can he apply everything he's learned so far and his techniques to a story that is real and has had real impacts on the world because of who Oppenheimer is? And I think in the trailers we already see some of that with the black and white like visuals, but that's what I want. I want to see Nolan's style in a very real story.
Yeah, that's a good take, man. I'm excited for that as well. I think another thing I'm looking forward to, my non-negotiable, is much like a roller coaster where, you know, when you're slowly going up on a roller coaster, everything in you kind of tenses up somewhat if you're even a little bit afraid of heights or the thrill of a roller coaster, because you can see the incoming drop. You see the drop coming. I want this movie not to show me the drop, but I want to leave the movie like at the edge of my seat, like Inception did. I don't have to. It doesn't have to be a thing of suspense. Just leave me not able to get up and having to watch the credits, not because I care for the credits necessarily, but because I just need some time. Like, give me some time. I just need to process, because I that's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing that crowds are leaving very, very like gripped and just shook off the way that the movie lands and it ends. So I'm excited for the journey, man. It's gonna be great. Willie, real quick, wait. Before we end, just a couple fast Nolan questions. What's your top 5 Nolan film? Top 5 Nolan films after we've went through all 11 of these. Top 5 Nolan films.
Inception, The Prestige, The Dark Knight, Interstellar, Dunkirk. But if I'm being honest, the bottom 3 might all be able to move around with one another.
That's a good batch. I like that. I think for me it would be Inception, Prestige, Dark Knight, Interstellar, Dark Knight Rises.
Our lists are definitely very similar then.
And then last question. Oppenheimer is right around the corner, and we know that there is a huge group of actors that are in this movie. Small, big, huge, A-list, C-list, B-list. But who's an actor that you want to see work with Nolan in the future? Because we know he's not done. Who would you want to see take on a Nolan written role?
I've got 3 answers. So number 1 would be Ewan McGregor. You know, I just feel like every time I've seen him, he puts his all into the role. So I'll give him that. Number 2, Tony Dalton from Hawkeye. You would know him from, but he's also on Better Call Saul. He seems like an actor who just loves to act. And so I would love to see what Nolan can do with him. And then Pedro Pascal, even though that might be like a damn, he's in everything kind of answer, but why not, you know? Rami Malek would have been my answer, but he's in Oppenheimer, so I'm going that way.
I've got 2, man. I would love to see him do something with young talent. My boy Damson Idris from Snowfall. He's actually about to be in a new movie with Brad Pitt that's based on NASCAR. I would love to see him use someone like do a young story. A lot of the characters that we see are these established adults. To do something in the area of like adolescence or youth or like early 20s, I would very much like something like that from him. And I think Damson would be really good for a role like that since he's kind of blowing up right now. Second person I'd say is Chris Evans. I know that sounds mad wild, but Chris Evans has such a wide array of acting abilities.
No, Chris Evans would definitely be really fun to see. To handle a rumor or a leak or whatever we want to call it real quick, Christopher Nolan did an interview recently where he was asked if he would ever do a superhero movie, and his response was, not again. Like, I did Batman, that's it. But then they asked, oh, will you do a Star Wars movie? And his response was, no comment. I would love to see Chris Nolan handle a Star Wars production, but I would also really love to see him do a medieval movie. I think that could be dope. But in terms of what he has available for us now, if you haven't seen The Prestige or Inception, please go watch.
You heard him. It's The Prestige and Inception.
Be sure to tune in to next week's episode where we discuss San Diego Comic-Con 2023, because it's looking like it's going to be a very different Comic-Con compared to previous years. But until then, thank you for listening.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of CUZZO-OP, where you'll always find two cousins, one podcast, endless entertainment.